25 disturbing scenes. Seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's no biggie. There are plenty more out there with gnarlier stuff than you could ever imagine. It takes a special kind of mind to come up with the disturbing things that make it on these lists, and then that special mind has to go and convince an entire team of filmmakers to actually make it happen. Imagine pitching this kind of stuff to your producer, but hey, it all works out in the end, right? Let's take a look at some of these successful ideas come to life in the top 5 most disturbing scenes in horror movies, part 5. Coming in at number 5, we've got Fish Boy from House of a Thousand Corpses. When Rob Zombie makes a feature film with a title like that, you already know what you're getting into when you step into that theater. More sickening stuff that you can shake a stick at, a bunch of over-the-top characters being as disgusting and despicable as possible, Sherry Moon Zombie in a prominent role. But even when you're prepared for the inevitable, there's a lot of room for stuff to catch you off guard. Like in a movie jam-packed with folks boning the dead, using dismembered body parts for unspeakable acts, and a gigantic underground human experimentation hovel, you wouldn't expect a piece of campy country fried art to really turn your stomach. But subverting expectations is what this is all about. So yeah, Fish Boy. God, this thing is nasty. After meeting our cast of so-called protagonists, they end up meeting Captain Spaulding, who shows them a good time at his Museum of Monsters and Madness. They pick up Baby, and she guides them to her family home, where a bunch of uncomfortable weird happens. Now at this point, you know what's about to go down. The lunatic family in the middle of nowhere is going to methodically kill all these young folks, which is true. But the way they go about it is so out there that it made House of a Thousand Corpses a cult classic. And of course, we kick it all off with Dear Fish Boy. Poor Bill, he never stood a chance. After restraining the rest of their guests, the Firefly family gets to work on young Bill. Otis, a tortured artist, decides that it's time to make another masterpiece. Somehow, in a relatively short period of time, he sews pieces of Bill's body to a bunch of fish parts, creating a nasty, stinking piece of taxidermy that defies all conceptions of good taste. The reveal is shocking, especially in context, and the overall effect is nauseating. Crazier still, the creation of Fish Boy was supposed to have a lot more on-screen time and plenty more nastiness. Unfortunately, these bits got cut, but that didn't stop this scene from becoming one of the most disturbing across the Firefly trilogy. I know there are moments that are much more wicked throughout the trio of movies, but there's something extra special about our aquatic man-beast. Coming in at number 4, Operation from The Thing. If you were a kid with mediocre fine motor skills like me, you understand the stress of seeing that awful man's red nose right when you goofed up fake surgery. Even though it didn't actually electrically shock you or anything, it might as well have, thanks to the terrible sensation that making a mistake elicited. But here's the thing. Until you've had your arms chopped off while attempting to shock your pal back to life, followed by an unspeakable abomination oozing out of his lifeless body and escaping a defensive flamethrower blast, you haven't known true operating table terror. Ah, the Norris Thing, the benchmark for insane practical effects. Name a movie scene with a more wicked monster transformation than this and I'll be impressed. Like, really impressed. When it comes to all of the practical effects wizardry woven throughout John Carpenter's Antarctic Quarantine classic, any of the Thing iterations could make it on this list. There's enough goop, blood, guts, and exceedingly pliable flesh to fuel a month's worth of body horror discussion, or 39 years if you want to be exact. But there are so many moving parts in the scene, so many good bits, that it's impossible to scrub it from your brain. First, you've got the high-intensity rush over to the defibrillator after Norris seems to have a heart attack. Cooper is ready to administer the shock, and then, whoops, a giant maw opens up in Norris's torso like some sort of human chest mimic. Actually, that's kind of funny if you think about it. You know, like a chest mimic, like a wooden chest mimic, but it's a human chest mimic. If that makes sense, let me know. I think it's funny. Then we get a bunch of flailing tendrils and a beautiful, disgusting face worm thing bursting forth into the world. As MacReady takes care of the obvious threat with a flamethrower, the more human head melts off the table, detaches, and turns into a spider thing. Anyone's first watch of this incredible scene involves jaws on the floor and eyes wide as dinner plates. No exceptions. Personally, I have trouble feeling anything but awe when watching it play out, but that might just be the overenthusiastic horror fan in me. It is really cool for sure, but before it could be wicked awesome, it had to be disturbing. Coming in at number 3, late night visitors from Hereditary. Essentially ushering in the latest era of family trauma-focused horror, a lot of horror movies get compared to Hereditary. But there's only one Ari Aster, and he knows exactly how to make folks uncomfortable. After giving every audience member a mini heart attack with the brownie-fueled late-night drive, Hereditary manages to insert a bunch more disturbing moments. One that seems to stick out more than most, however, is the penultimate sequence, right before poor Annie floats her way up into the treehouse. Peter wakes up in his dark house after a distressing day, and he stumbles across his father's dead body. As he makes his way throughout the house, the audience has a better view of the rooms than he does. Nude Paimon worshippers wait in the nooks and crannies of every room, smiling in the moonlight at their soon-to-be otherworldly king. To make matters worse, Annie has been totally overtaken by the cult and now seems to have otherworldly abilities, like scaling walls with ease. Peter makes his way up to the attic and witnesses 2 more utterly upsetting things. 1, his mother dangling in midair, hastily separating her head from her body. And 2, a bunch of nude cultists watching him from the shadows. Of course, the best and only option is to jump out the window. I would too. This is a scene that may well have launched a now potentially overplayed nude old people horror scene. Has anyone else noticed the uptick in naked senior citizens played for scares in recent horror? Just me? Coming in at number 2, split-tongue Frenching from Evil Dead 2013. Again, lots to be disturbed by in this flick, but one scene stands above the rest. After Mia is possessed by the abomination, she has a wild time tormenting all of her friends. She shoots David, who locks her in the cellar, which seems to be a good idea until you realize how creepy said cellar is. Her pal Natalie ends up down there with her, and that's when things get really gross. Mia says all sorts of horrid things to Natalie and begins touching her in ways you would never want a hateful demonic creature to touch anyone. She ends up biting Natalie's hand and then finds herself an X-Acto knife. Extending the blade to full length, Mia brings it towards her face and sticks her tongue out. Uh-oh. Using the sharp implement, Mia bisects her tongue, taking on the appearance of a really messed up snake person. Once the tasting tool is in twain, she wiggles the 2 bits around and then goes in for a smooch. There are layers to what makes this scene disturbing. Of course, the non-consensual nature of it is bad to start with. Then you add in the actual tongue being divided in 2, which is horrible to behold. And finally, there's the kiss itself, which conjures up the sensation of blood in your mouth. Somebody else's blood. Somebody else's tongue blood. And I can't imagine having a tongue like that forced into your mouth would be pleasant in the slightest. Yeesh. And finally at number 1, Teresa and Jack from Color Out of Space. Now, if you want to make something extra upsetting, add some tragedy to your horror. Nobody in this movie asked for any of this, but they're gonna get it. When a pink color touches down on your farm and begins changing the nature of everything you once held to be true, there's not much you can do. At first, it just seems like everyone's sort of losing their minds, but it is so much worse than that. After discovering that the farm's alpacas were horribly mutated by the color, young Jack and his mother Teresa succumb to the same fate. A bolt of energy fuses them together into an abominable mass of flesh and agony, unable to do anything other than writhe about. Sunlight hurts them too, so the family is forced to move the mass up into the attic. The reveal is disturbing enough, with the amalgamation of flesh and bone being quite hard to look at, but the shockwaves it sends through the rest of the family are almost impossible to reckon with. Nathan loses both his son and wife in one fell swoop, but they're not even really dead. They're an inhuman oddity, impossible to communicate with, but still containing bare elements of those that he loved. Ouch. Feeling distraught? Upset? Disturbed, perhaps? I don't blame ya. These are some movie moments that will go down in infamy, and for good reason. So what'd you think of the list? Do you agree with my picks? Should I go darker on the next episode? Are we thinking like slaughtered vomit dolls or something? I've been trying to avoid that up until this point. What are some of your favorite disturbing scenes? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more perplexing ones from the top 5 horror movies you shouldn't watch alone. Scott Gray says, every time I think of The Strangers, I think, why are you doing this to us? Because you were home. Easily one of the most haunting responses ever. It's been copied so much since then. It's super influential for a reason. Poker Face says, I liked Hush a lot, but once the killer took off his mask, I lost all fear of him. He became just some guy. Isn't that part of the spooky allure? Anyone could just decide to become a killer at the drop of a hat. Could be you. Marigan Beltran says, my husband thinks horror movies are stupid. Do my dogs count? They don't seem to care what I'm watching as long as I share my snacks. I think you might have made a slight miscalculation there. It's probably best to take the dogs and move to a different country. Start over. Find someone who does like horror movies. Frankie Arenas says, Keegan, can I have half of your beanie collection? I'll give you a burger today and 2 tomorrow. Honestly, it depends on the kind of burger. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm going to break the seal on a cursed relic and keep it under my bed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Even though it didn't actually shock you or anything, it might as well have, thanks to that terrible sensation that mistaking a until you've had your arms chomped off while attempting to shock your pal back to life, followed by an unspeakable abomination oozing out of his lifeless body and escaping a defensive flamethrower blast, you haven't known